is so very easy. My name is Laura, and these little triangular bags are very quick and easy to make. They have that unique look at them, which makes them great for gift giving, and it's great for storing stuff in. I like to make them using zippers that I've pulled out of old clothing and out of old leftover fabric. It gives me a chance to use up my scraps and recycle my zippers. It looks like a triangle, but they're very easy because they're made with squares. The first thing I want to start with is a zipper. And I collect zippers from old clothing before I throw them away. I also collect the fabric like denim from jeans. So I'm going to use the denim, an old zipper, some fabric for a lining, and a light or medium weight fusible interfacing. And the size of the bag will be dictated by the size of your zipper. This is a metal zipper, so I'm not going to make it any shorter. If it's a plastic zipper or any other zipper that you can cut, you can then choose whatever size you want. But I love using up old zippers. We need to cover each end of the zipper. I would recommend it in a lighter fabric versus the denim, and that way it'll be easier to sew. We need 4 pieces of fabric that are going to be big enough to cover the zipper and come up a little bit higher. We'll be able to trim off any of the extra that we want. I don't even measure these pieces because I know they're going to be trimmed down. I'm going to need 2 pieces for one side, 2 pieces for the next. I'm going to work on one side at a time. For the bottom side, I'm going to take the fabric and I'm going to place it right side down along the top of the zipper and pin that down. I'm going to be able to take this and turn it over and stitch. This way you can see what you're going to stitch without running over that metal. With that row of stitching done, I won't have to worry about stitching over top of the teeth of the zipper. With that first row of stitching done, I'm going to be able to take the second piece, line up the edges, pin the fabric down, and turn it over. I can see my stitching line on this side of the fabric, and that's the line I'm going to follow. I can just stitch starting on one side, go all the way off to the other, following this stitching line. By following that line, you're not going to by accident run over the teeth of the zipper. If you're going to do a zipper and it's going to be shorter and it's a nylon zipper, you're going to be able to go over top of the zipper. But with a metal one, you do not want to run over the teeth. Both those sides are now stitched down. I'll be able to take both of them and fold them down and press. If you'd like, you can do a row of top stitching just to secure it. This is all going to be trimmed down after. I'm going to repeat for the top part of the zipper. This time I'm going to open the zipper a little bit so that I don't accidentally stitch onto the pull tab. When I stitch this piece down, I just want to make sure that my ends stay together. Do that row of stitching right along the top, and that way you can see the teeth again. I'll put on the second piece, pin, and stitch from this side. I now have a nice big finished end on both sides of the zipper, and both sides look good. You are going to need 2 squares for the outside, which I'm going to use the denim, and 2 squares the same size for the inside, and I'm going to use the matching fabric. So my squares can range anywhere within this size. I'm going to make the squares just a little bit bigger than that zipper. And in this case, it's 7 inches. Because I'm trying to use leftover fabric for this, I'm also going to use whatever interfacing I have on hand. And this is a lightweight fusible interfacing. It could even be a medium weight. I'm going to cut a piece a little bit bigger than I'm going to need, and then I'll trim it down later. So I can go and fuse the interfacing onto the wrong side of the fabric. Once that stabilizer is on, I cut the square to the size I need. So I have 2 squares for the outside. I'm going to need 2 squares the same size for the inside. If you want, you can embellish the outside of the bag. You have to keep in mind you're going to need a seam allowance all the way around, so you don't want anything too close that you can't stitch close to or stitch over. And just like the zippers, I do like to collect the odd things from projects. So I'm just going to stitch one of those on. Once you have the front of the bag embellished the way you want it, you're going to be able to add the zipper onto the front of the bag, and in this case it's my denim. And even though that zipper is way too big, I'm just going to line it up along the edge. I'm going to be able to look underneath and see if it's exactly the way I want it. Having that extra is just going to be easier for you to hold on to. I'll just line it up and cut that off later. I'll put the zipper foot on and I'm going to stitch as close as I can to this edge. And this is going to anchor that on until I get to the next stage. Once that first row of stitching is put on, I can cut off that extra. That closed stitch now just holds that zipper into the place that I want it to be in. From here, I'm going to be able to add on that second part of the bag. So I can line up the edges, flip the square, and stitch as close as you can to this edge, just anchoring that zipper. From here, we're going to add the lining on. So if we turn the bag over, we are going to want the lining to look like this. But we want that zipper to be inside of that lining. So we'll start with one side at a time. This is the way I want it to look, but I want that zipper inside. The easiest would be just to take this and fold this out of your way so you know this is the piece you're working with and that is the edge of the zipper you're going to work with. Just take that. You're going to be able to match up the raw edges with the top of that fabric. So the zipper's inside. You can now stitch through the 2 layers of fabric and the zipper, so everything is going to be enclosed. When it's folded back, the seam allowance is inside. And we have the 2 good sides showing. We now need to put the other side on. Fold that piece out of your way. This is how we want the piece to look. So we're going to take that and match up that seam. So the raw edges are going to meet and the zipper is inside. With that edge stitched down, when you open it up, you have your lining on one side, the good side on the other, and both the seam allowances are inside. You can do a row of top stitch along here, only stitching the zipper and the top layer, not the bottom layer. So move the bottom layer out of the way, do a row of top stitching right along the edge of that zipper. When that side's done, move the other layer out and top stitch along this edge. Trim off those leftover ends and just make sure that it has not shifted. If so, trim it so both of the edges are straight. Have your zipper undone halfway. That way you don't have an accident of running over the end, but you're also going to need this area to turn the bag right side out. Match up the front pieces and match up the lining. You're going to be stitching the 2 long sides together. So you're stitching over top of that zipper. You're not stitching the ends. You're going to have a space where you've put that little piece at the end of the zipper. Just take that piece and push it towards the lining, match up the seams, and stitch down each side. The bag is like a tube and that zipper is in the center. If you put your hand in the one side, you're going to be able to open that zipper up all the way. We're going to take this bag and we're going to sew it together so that this seam matches this seam. Take that bag and just pull it apart until those seams match. You can have one seam go in one direction, the other seam in another, so they nestle together. Just stitch right down. Back stitch at each end to strengthen those corners. Now we can just snip off a little bit of that corner. By taking those little ends off, it's going to make that corner turn nice. You don't need a lot, just a little bit. The lining side is going to need the same thing. However, you're going to need to leave an opening so you can turn this whole bag right side out. If the bag is very small, you might not stitch this at all until the bag has been turned. So you're going to have to judge how much space you're going to need. I like to stitch just a little bit on each corner so I don't have to match my corners when I turn them right side out. Match up those 2 side seams and stitch a little bit in the corners. I'm going to be able to turn this bag right side out. Put your hand through that opening, grab the bottom of this bag and just pull it out. Now I'm going to be able to put my head back into that bag and straighten out those corners. Once you have your 4 corners poked out, you're going to be able to close off the bottom of that bag. Just push in the seam allowance and do a row of stitching. You can now poke in that lining, and when you do up the zipper, you have this little triangular storage bag. So that zipper is going to dictate the size of your bag. It's quick and easy, and all you need are 4 squares and a zipper. I do hope you give it a try, and as always, thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.